Growing up, I was very close to my father. I was the youngest of my dad's kids and the only child he had with my mother. And I spent a lot of time with my father as a little kid. Growing up, we were damn near inseparable. We did everything together. The only time I ever flew a kite was with my father. My father taught me how to cook. He used to take me to movies all the time. Then in 88, my parents divorced. And my dad went from being a full time parent to a part time parent. And then an absent parent. Eventually, he became a non existent parent. Well, in 97, he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Ironically, it was caught early because he had to have monthly checkups because my father was prone to having strokes and seizures. So, because the prostate cancer was caught so early, they told him it probably could have been wiped out if he had taken chemo. But my father chose not to do chemo. He was just very stubborn about it. Instead, he decided to have monthly injections, which were meant supposedly to keep the cancer from spreading too far. Well, in 2005, me and him had a falling out over stupid shit. Stuff that, honestly, if we had just sat on the phone and conversated for a while, could have been worked out easily, but I can be a bit of a stubborn person, and my father is definitely a very stubborn person. So, two stubborn people don't make for good conversation sometimes, so we just weren't talking. Well, after a while in my life, there was a pregnancy, a miscarriage, another pregnancy, and a death. And then the person who I was with for a couple of years, that relationship ended, thankfully. So I was alone in 2011, and I decided to try and communicate with him. See, my father lost a daughter long before I was ever born. And she died when she was 10. And he admitted to me that after she died, he really didn't want to have any more kids. Which I can understand because when you lose a child, a part of you kind of dies. And it doesn't want to try to get attached to anyone like that again because you're just afraid. I didn't feel like I had anybody I could really talk to except him because he really knew how that felt. So I started talking to him again. He was in a veterans hospital in Miami, and what I did not know was that when we weren't talking, his health was getting worse. All the injections after a while weren't making any difference. And on top of that, he had now also developed lung cancer. Well, in January of 2012, I was informed that his health had taken a critical turn for the worse. So in February, both my mother and I drove from Atlanta to Miami to see him. And I was not prepared. My father was like 5'11", 6'1", big guy. When I saw him in the hospital bed, he was down to the bone. Hooked up to IVs, hooked up to morphine, hooked up to a piss bag. Almost always asleep. When he wasn't asleep, he was usually in constant pain. I was there for 3 days. Usually he would wake up at night, it seemed. When he would wake up at night, he would just be howling in agony. And I remember one time clearly him waking up, and I went over to him, and he looked dead at me, and I looked at him. But I don't think he even saw me, because he was in such pain and he was so out of it. He looked like a wounded animal that just wanted to go. And at that moment, feeling so helpless, I honestly wanted him to die so that he wouldn't hurt anymore. The Miami Veterans Hospital has a facility, a boarding house actually, called the Fisher House. It's free room and board for immediate relatives of veteran patients who are under hospice care. It's a beautiful place. I mean, they really go out of their way to make the place as comfortable as possible. But it's very surreal because you're only there because you have a father or a brother or a son or a husband or a grandfather who is dying. It's almost like you're part of some weird fraternity. And one thing about Miami is at night you can see a lot of stars at night. I mean, Miami has a very beautiful sky. And I used to feel guilty sitting out at night under the stars, seeing all that beauty, knowing that just a couple of yards away in the hospice wing, my father was going through hell, dying slowly, and there was nothing I could do about it. Finally, the morning before I left, I remember my mother was with me. I mean, these people have been divorced for years, and it ended badly, and it was very messy, mainly because of him. To be honest, my father did not take the divorce well. Frankly, he was an asshole. And the truth is, he behaved like an asshole because he was afraid of losing my mother, and he didn't know how to take it. Because my father just did not know how to better handle his emotions. He kept everything in. But my mother was there to try and offer him some comfort. And it made me think how things could have been different if he had just been a different person. Eventually, it was just him and me in the room, and he was awake. And I leaned into him and I whispered in his ear so he could hear me that I was proud that he was my father. And he heard me, and he said he was proud I was his son. I had already made plans to see him again the following month, but something told me that I had better say everything I had to say. It was almost like I knew I wasn't going to see him again. So we had that brief moment, and that was that. So later on, in March, I was making plans to see him, but the week before I could get down there, he died. March 20th, on a Tuesday night, sometime around 9 o'clock, 9:30. And when I heard he died, I felt a sense of relief that he was no longer in pain. But I also felt sadness because he didn't have any of his kids there, none of his grandkids. Surrounded by no one but a bunch of nurses all alone. I just thought he deserved better. He's now buried at a military cemetery right outside of Miami. I haven't been to his grave yet, not since the funeral. But hopefully, when I do go there to see him, to visit him, hopefully by the time I get there, I still would have made him proud that I was his son.